And Merry Christmas. Oh, there I am. That's Merry Christmas indeed. Good morning. We want to obviously welcome you this morning on this wonderful Christmas Eve. And we do want to find out if there are any new guests with us who have joined us this morning. We have a little welcome packet for you, a little early Christmas present. If you're new with us, would you throw your hand up this morning? Our ushers have a little packet for you. I can't really see you too well, which is, right here. Oh, very good, very good. Right here by Doug. We have a little packet for you. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. During these holiday seasons, we always love to get together with our families, and it kind of starts in Thanksgiving. My wife and I were laughing. Our holiday season has just been kind of crazy party after crazy party, gathering with our siblings and mothers and fathers and in-laws, and we just share stories. Whenever you get together with your family, you just hear these stories come out. And some of them you haven't heard in a long time. Some of them you've heard a few too many times. Some of you know the storytellers in your family that tell the same stories over and over. I know that that's my future. That's what awaits my children. And so I'm preparing them for that already. But one of the things we love to do is share stories. And this morning we're going to share a story that you've heard a number of different times. And so one of the things we talked about is, why do we continue to share and celebrate this story of Jesus the Messiah, God's anointed one who came to earth? Why do we continue? Isn't it good enough just to know it? Why do we celebrate it and tell it every year? And I think there's a few reasons for that. One is because of the significance of it. One, it's not just a story that grows bigger. It's not some fish tale. It is true. The story of Jesus the Messiah, the anointed one who God sent with this purpose to rescue his people, is a story that reveals God the Father to us, and God the Father, by the power of the Holy Spirit, as revealed through Jesus Christ, will absolutely change and transform our lives and give us not just a life to look forward in the future, not just a great hope for life after this life, but will bring us redemption and sanctification and life transformation now. And that's why we come to church on Sundays, and that's why we engage in a study of God's Word, and that's why we continue to tell the story of Jesus. And so we're going to tell that story this morning through spoken word, through singing some songs, and like any good story, where do you start? The beginning. You start at the very beginning. And so the first pictures we get of the story of Jesus actually takes us all the way back to Genesis, where God, the great and mighty God, created a man and woman to have relationship with him, for Adam and Eve to be in this unity with him, to have this fullness of hope and this fullness of joy. They trusted God. They looked forward to all the incredible things that he would provide for them with great expectation. And we know how the story goes. Adam and Eve, his perfect chosen children, decided to go a different direction. Eve was deceived and led Adam, and they took of the forbidden fruit. And everything changed. And everything broke. What was hope became despair. What was joy became misery. And following their disobedience, they stood there and they looked, and many of us have felt this before. Maybe the worst part was they looked at what they had done and they realized there was nothing they could do to make it right. It didn't matter what they could do. They could never put back what they had broken. But God entered into that place. And in Genesis chapter 3, he tells them, it's coming at the end of when he's explaining to them the consequences. They don't even know what consequences are yet. He's explaining to them the negative consequences that are going to be affected because of their disobedience. And in there, he gives the first promise. In there, he gives the first promise of someone who will come and deliver them from what they had just experienced, from the consequences that had just been rolled out. He promises someone who is to come, a deliverer. And then the story of the New Testament, as the chosen people of God move from just Adam and Eve to their children, then it grows to a family under Abraham. It grows to an incredible nation of millions and millions of people. And through their history, they continually wait. They wait for this person, this son of Eve, who God had promised to come and deliver them. A Messiah, an anointed one. And God would make it clear when he came what he would come to do. And in their time of waiting, their thousands of years of waiting, they never forgot. They never forgot which was promised to them so many years before. And they sang songs and recited verses, and God reminded them that there was going to be one to come to them, that God himself was going to come and be with them as their Emmanuel. And so if you would stand, we're going to sing together again.
God promised that he would send a Messiah, a rescuer, a redeemer, one that would make things right between God and man. Would be the offspring of Eve. He would be the snake crusher. He would be the one to defeat death. That was what God had promised, but when? When would he come? Years passed and more years passed and time built. There were many, many births and just as many deaths. You can imagine that people lost hope. When would he come? Now, during that time, there were also many other messiahs that came about, that God raised up. Men who did certain jobs and who rescued Israel, God's people, for a time. But those rescuers, those messiahs, only did it for a time in a certain area. And then, like the rest of humanity, they died. Most of these messiahs came about, and God marked their births or their birth stories, if we want to talk in TLC language. But their birth stories were marked with this miraculous event or multiple events. Like, for instance, you remember Samson. And when Samson, before he was born, his mom was barren. He said that she couldn't have kids. And then an angel, right, God sent one of his messengers, entered into human space and time. And the messenger goes and appears before Samson's mom and says, "You're going to give birth to a boy, and he's going to do my bidding. He's going to do what I ask him to do. He's going to rescue my people Israel." And it happened for a time. Samson, many flaws, a very flawed man, but he did. He rescued Israel and he gave them peace for a time, and then he died. God raised up men like Samuel, a similar birth story, mom's barren, and then is given a son, and the son leads the nation of Israel for a time, and then dies. You even remember Moses, miraculous birth story, if there's ever one. Born in a time of slavery. He's destined for destruction as the decree is to kill all the baby boys of Israel. And then his parents put him in a basket down the Nile River, and he's adopted by a princess. He's raised in the royal house of Egypt, and he rescued his people for a time. But then he died, and hope was lost as well. And then it says in the exact right moment, or in the fullness of time, God again entered to human history, and the Messiah was promised to be born. And he did it as he did of old in a miraculous way, but almost in a greater way than all of those put together. And it came about by announcing it to two different couples, one older couple and one younger couple. And the older couple, their name was Zachariah, and her name was Elizabeth. And Zachariah and Elizabeth were older in years, and Elizabeth was barren. She couldn't have kids. And they were past the age of having kids even. There was no hope, there was no thought that anything like that would ever happen to them. And so one day, as Zachariah was a priest, and he was taking his allotted time in his job at the temple in Jerusalem, and he's standing in the temple all by himself. And as he's offering incense to the Lord, all of a sudden this angel appears. And Zechariah, thinking he was a dead man, the only thing that happens here in the temple when an angel appears is you die. And he was afraid. It's probably the understatement of the Bible. And he thinks he's a goner. And then Gabriel is the angel's name. And Gabriel says to him to not fear, that he's going to, actually him and his wife are going to have a son. And his name's going to be John. And John is going to turn the hearts of the people back to their Messiah. And they're going to remember and they're going to look. And it's going to be John's job to point to the Messiah. He was going to be the one that's going to say, look, he's here. So Zechariah, like all, I have great pity on Zechariah. He just says the first thing that comes to his mind, and it's, but we're old. How are we going to have? And Gabriel, in another good moment, he just stops him and he says, do you know who I am? I stand in the throne room of God. So Zechariah, it's God, me, to you. And what I say is going to come about because I speak for God. And he tells Zechariah, because you didn't believe, I'm going to make you mute for a time. Like, you're not going to be able to speak until these things happen. And so as Zechariah, he emerges from the temple, and everyone wants to know what in the world happened in there. And he can't talk. So they realize with his motion, and I'm sure he's scribbling something on something, and they realize he's seen an angel. And then the time marches on, and what the angel has said happens. Elizabeth is pregnant, and she gives birth. And in Zechariah, they name him John, and he can speak. So it was a barren woman past her years of having kids, an angel appearing, God's doing something. And then there was a young couple, and couldn't really even say they were a couple at that point. Mary and Joseph, and they were betrothed to be married, but they weren't even married yet. And then an angel comes and appears to Mary. It was Gabriel again, the one who stands in the throne room of God, the ones who does God's messaging, that he tells people what God has said, and he appears to Mary and he says, you're going to give birth to a son. By the power of the Holy Spirit, even though you're a virgin, you're going to give birth to a son. And this son is going to sit on his father David's throne. And this son, his throne is never going to end. His reign, he's going to be a part of a kingdom that has no end. That Mary was going to give birth to the Messiah. And then Joseph, you can imagine, Mary's betrothed. He hasn't known her yet. So he must have been thinking, what in the world? I've been betrayed. And so an angel appears to Joseph in a dream. He says not to be afraid to take Mary as his wife, not to put her away in divorce, but he should marry Mary. Oh, did he slip up there? But he should marry her. Because the son, the baby that's in Mary's womb is from the Holy Spirit, and that he is going to save his people from their sins. And so Joseph takes Mary as his wife. But God entered into human history, and he revealed the birth story of the Messiah in a most grand way, giving hope, giving joy, giving promise. The Messiah had come. And so please stand with me as we sing, Hark the Herald Angels Sing.
When Joseph got the news that Caesar Augustus had declared a census for all the Roman Empire, and because Joseph and Mary were both descendants of David, that meant that they would have to travel a 10-day journey to Bethlehem to be registered for the census. And this, you can imagine, would be terrible and anxiety-filled news for Joseph, whose wife could give birth at any day, at any time. When you think about this 10-day journey, I'm sure it's crossing his mind. What if she goes into labor on the road? Or what if there's complications and things don't go smoothly? What will happen? And I'm sure it crosses his mind, how should we get there? What route should I take? Maybe I should take the quicker route that runs through Samaria. But Jews didn't like to go through Samaria. And the tension between the Jews and the Samaritans could often cause violence, and it could be potentially dangerous. And so maybe the best route was to take the longer route, which led to more questions of what would happen. And there didn't seem really to be any good answers for them. But they knew that saying no to the Roman Empire was not an option. So they put their trust in God, they packed their things, and they began their journey towards Bethlehem. And it would have been a slow journey for them. They would have been traveling much slower than the rest of the travelers who were on the road. Mary would have been incredibly uncomfortable and at times in pain. And they would have to stop to rest and to refresh multiple times on the journey. And so by the time they got to to Bethlehem, any relief they got from making it there safely was quickly washed away by the fact that their slower journey had made them one of the last people to arrive in the city. And that it was overrun with people. And that there was no room in a house, that there was no room in an inn, and there was nowhere for them to stay. And worse, Mary was now going into labor. And so the only place for them to stay was with the animals. And not in a barn like we often see, but probably more in a cave hewn out of stone where they would place their animals for safety. And so into this cave they went. And it would have smelled, it would have been noisy, it would have the smell of animals and manure filling the air. And they had no bed, there was no hot water, there was no bathroom. It was just the two of them and what they had brought with them, the cold, hard ground, and the company of animals. And in the first century, having a baby, even in good situations, is a potentially risky thing for a mother and for the child. And so you can imagine the anxiety of Joseph now having to deliver this baby in a cave with these animals. And so the relief must have been huge. When the baby was born, and the baby was okay, and Mary was okay. And they cleaned the baby up, and they wrapped the baby in cloth. And looking for a place to lay the baby that would be the most comfortable, they pulled a manger and they cleaned it out, made it as comfortable as they could, and they placed the baby into it. And so the first bed that the Messiah had was a feeding trough meant for animals. And when the angel had appeared to the shepherds in the field, the angel said, "It will be a sign to you, and the sign will be that you will find a baby laying in a manger." That the manger itself was the sign for the shepherds. It was the humbleness of the manger that was the sign that this was the Messiah. And as we think about the incidences that happened on this journey for Jesus' birth, through the announcement from Caesar, to the difficult journey, to having nowhere to stay, to being the time of Mary's birth, that it can seem like it was a set of hard circumstances or random misfortunes. But that's not the case. It was God's plan the whole time. That 700 years before, through the prophet Micah, God had let Israel know that the Messiah would come and he would be born in Bethlehem. But Mary and Joseph weren't from Bethlehem. They were from Nazareth. And so God caused the most powerful man in the world to call a census of the whole Roman Empire at the exact time of Mary's birth, so that Mary and Joseph would be in Bethlehem. And the God who used a whole nation for his purposes could easily have arranged for a room for Mary and Joseph. But that was not the plan. It wasn't random circumstances, it was the plan of God. That Jesus was born at the right place, at the right time, under the right circumstances, the most humble circumstances possible. And in Philippians 2, it says of Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself by taking on the form of a servant and being born in the likeness of men. And that emptying of himself can sometimes seem like it's a negative term, that there's a great loss involved with it or a reluctance to the not holding on to it. But that's not the case. That's the very nature of a loving God, to empty himself for his people, to reach down and rescue those who need rescuing. And so we celebrate the birth of the Messiah, who came in the most unusual way, in the most humble way, and in the most glorious way possible, as God reached out to mankind because we needed saving.
Well, I know for many of us, the Christmas season doesn't always bring hope or joy. I know for many of us, Christmas is a time that you think back and you remember to loved ones who you've lost or difficult circumstances, hard times in your life. I know even for me, I think back, for the last 3 years, lost both of my parents. And so sometimes, even for me, it's hard to find just that joy or that peace, that understanding. And so it can be a difficult time. And that would be true. It would be overpowering and overwhelming if this baby in the manger if that was the end of the story. If that's all. But it's not. As God promised to send the Messiah in the beginning, when the problem arose, and then the birth of Jesus, the realization, the vision, like we'd see the Messiah, God had come. But that wasn't the end. This Messiah, Jesus, born in Bethlehem, grew up in Nazareth. He lived a life. He grew up as a man. He lived a perfect life. He fulfilled the law in every way. Proved he was the Messiah by the many signs and wonders that he did. Proved that he was God. Did things that no one else, no human could do. Lived a perfect life. He was rejected by his own people. He was convicted on trumped up charges. He was turned over to the Romans. He died on a Roman cross. And if that was the end of the story, that would also be overwhelming. It wouldn't bring any hope and it wouldn't be any joy. But that's not the end of the story either. You see, Jesus was placed, his dead body was placed in a tomb. It was a big stone rolled and sealed. So they knew that there was nothing coming out of there. But God accepted Jesus' perfect sacrifice, the payment of sins for the entire world, not just the rescuing of a local group of people in a certain area, but the rescuing of an entire world of people, past, present, future, paying for their sins. And he accepted Jesus' sacrifice. And the proof of that is that the stone rolled away and Jesus came out alive. And there is the hope and the joy. But that's not the end of the story either. You see, those of us who have put our faith in Jesus as the one who would make things right between us and God, we're actually adopted into his family. We're called his children. We have peace with him. We have peace with God because of him. We're adopted into a family. We're given gifts. We're sanctified. We're continued to be made more like him. And even that's not the end of the story. Because just as God promised the Messiah and then he fulfilled it and we could see it in the birth of Jesus, he's also said that he's coming back. That Jesus will return and that those of us who have put our faith in him will rule and reign with him. And then at that point, death will finally be defeated. And that is something that gives hope and brings joy to the entire world. Those of old and now and in the future. Is that Jesus is coming back. He will dry every tear. And he will finally set things straight. And so as we think of this time, is we don't just look back, but we also look forward to when he will come back. And this last song that we're going to sing, called Joy to the World, isn't a Christmas song, but we always sing it at Christmas. Even we sing it at Christmas. But the song is actually written in expectation. It's looking forward to when Jesus will come back and truly bring joy. That he's coming back, that he's returning. And so it was written as a song that the church could sing at Jesus' return as we look forward to that day. And so why don't you stand with me as we close our service and we sing Joy to the World.